It was a night like any other. You ate some dinner, chatted with the family, then, suddenly, you were gone. But they didn't need to worry. You just snuck off for a second to play Best Fiends. Best Fiends is the mobile puzzle adventure game you want to play for hours on end, even when you only have a few moments to spare. From the vibrant artwork and adventure pack storyline to the cute collectible characters and supercharged power-ups, Best Fiends is designed to be the most obsession-worthy game ever. There are literally thousands of levels, plus tons of in-game events added every month for even more ways to win. And the best part is, you can play anytime, anywhere. No Wi-Fi, no problem. Of course, people may start to wonder about your mysterious disappearances until they see how much fun you're having. Download your new favorite getaway, Best Fiends, for free on the App Store or Google Play. You'll even get $5 worth of in-game rewards when you reach level 5. That's friends without the R, Best Fiends.
Play Best Fiends. Download free.
On September 3rd, 1990, Betty Jones and Catherine Krigler were raped and murdered in an unsolved case known as the Labor Day Murders.
You sure you really want to hear?
I do.
This is as bad as it gets.
There was so much blood that it soaked through the carpet.
I never understood how scary it was. That sense of being trapped.
Now more than ever, I want to help solve the murder of my beloved grandmother, Mama Betty. Listen to Knock Knock now on Podcast One or wherever you listen to podcasts.
I'm Brett,
And I'm Alice.
and we are the Prosecutors. Today on the Prosecutors, an overworked nurse gives her patient the wrong drug, and she dies as a result. But did she commit murder? Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by my late co-host, Alice.
You know what? Someone wrote like, oh, it's so annoying. Alice has to respond to all of the descriptors. And I was like, do you not get that it's like a shtick? It's like, you know, in theater, you do like the warm-ups, like me, brrr, watermelon, like because they're warm-ups to get into it. Well, Brett, we need to warm up before we actually talk to each other. And this is our warm up. It's like a soft volley. You know, just get it over the net. And I have no idea what word you just said, so I deflected just now, if you can't tell.
Alice, are you trying to say that I'm not being sincere when I call you these words?
I'm not saying
that is
you're
ridiculous.
not.
That is insulting.
I mean, let's be honest. You're not being sincere because it's our wonderful listeners who feed you these words.
They do. Leif, by the way, is from Joe. Leif is actually Luxembourgese, apparently. And Joe pointed out that Luxembourgese is not a dialect of French. It's actually its own language, but it's much closer to German than French. So I think Leif is also a word in German. It means beloved, and you are beloved, Alice, both by me and by the listeners.
That's very sweet. Thank you for that word. It is beautiful. That's a beautiful word. And I just felt like addressing it because I thought that was one of the strangest reviews.
It was weird. I'm not going to say it wasn't
it's
weird.
okay. It's okay. Everyone can have their thoughts about our warm-up activity, but I don't know.
Some people say you shouldn't read your reviews, but I get such a kick out of the bad ones that it's like the best part of my day. And we like to share them with everyone. And some people think we're sharing them because we're upset by them. We're not upset
shaming.
By them. Let me be clear.
We are shaming. Oh, whoops. Did I just say the quiet part out loud?
Oh, yes, you did. And, here we are spending 5 minutes talking about something other than the case, which will piss someone off. And that's fine. That's what life's all about, is having strong emotions about things that don't matter. But anyway, I also want to thank, and I'm serious here, I'm not being, all the Australian fans and listeners who wrote in to correct our terrible geography. I am sorry that I don't know more about Australian geography, which is why I need to go to Australia and see you guys. So I'm really hoping that you guys get together and set something up so we can come and you can explain to us that they're states, not provinces, and what the difference between Queensland and New South Wales is. I want to see it for myself on the ground. So that is my challenge to those of you in Australia. Let's see what we can do. Well, guys, we have a new case today. This is one that came highly recommended by a lot of people. It's very fresh. It's about a recent conviction. But not just any conviction and not just any kind of trial. This was what I think may be one of the first in the nation, if not one of the very few in the nation, where criminal charges were brought against a nurse for a mistake made at a hospital that resulted in a patient's death. We are talking about the case of RaDonda Vaught. Those of you who are nurses, I know you've been following this. I know you feel very passionate about this. Alice and I had just the absolute pleasure and opportunity to speak with the Good Nurse, Bad Nurse podcast about this case. It was totally fascinating. We learned so much. We wanted to talk to that podcast before we did our episode because we knew we'd learn a lot, and we absolutely did.
Yeah, Brett, that was such an awesome conversation because we try to do as much research as possible. And as much research as you have, it's so different when you talk to someone who lives in that profession, who lives in that culture and that environment. And that's just something that, reading reports or reading things on paper do not bring to life for us until we speak to real life nurses who are overworked, who have been in these taxing situations and can see themselves in this particular case we're going to talk about today.
And I just want to thank Tina over there for having us on. You guys, if you're not listening to this podcast, it's a great podcast, particularly if you're in the nursing field. But she has done so much work on this case, and it really was an honor to talk to her. So we're going to dive into this, and we're going to walk through what we think happened here, whether or not we think justice was served, and sort of what the takeaway is for everybody out there, particularly those of you in the nursing field. I know not everyone knows this story, so of course we are going to share it with you. Let's go ahead and dive into that. So, on December 26th, 2017, the day after Christmas, RaDonda Vaught was working at Vanderbilt University Hospital in Nashville, Tennessee, when she received a call from another nurse requesting assistance with a patient, Charlene Murphy. Murphy had been diagnosed with a brain bleed, but she was stable. Her doctors had ordered a PET scan so they could get a better idea of what exactly was going on and make sure that she was fine and that she could be released and she could go home. But as a lot of you guys know, the PET scan, it's a very simple procedure. It's non-invasive. It's basically a large x-ray, but it can be somewhat claustrophobic, and a lot of patients have trouble with that, with MRIs and with a lot of the different imaging that's done. And Murphy was claustrophobic, and so the doctors had decided, let's give her a sedative, something to relax her, so that this procedure is less problematic for her, easier for her. Vaught said she would get the sedative, she would take care of it. As you know, nurses, even before the pandemic, and this is before the pandemic, even before the pandemic, nurses were overworked. There weren't enough nurses to go around, and so everybody's helping each other out. So this nurse calls down and says, look, I've got some patients I got to handle. Can you help me on this? This isn't her patient, but she's going to help out. So she's told she needs a drug called Versed. She goes to an automatic drug dispensing cabinet and enters a request for that drug. So a lot of you guys have seen this, particularly if you've been in hospitals lately. It's just a big box. You put in the drug you want, and out the drug pops. But when she entered the medication into the machine and indicated it was for Murphy, Nothing came up. So she's asking for this medicine. It's supposed to be on Murphy's chart, but it's not. And since it's not, the automatic machine will not give it to her. And there was a reason for this that we would learn later. In fact, the generic name for the medication had been entered onto the chart. Something called midazolam. Vaught didn't know that. And she actually could not recall what the generic term was for Versed. Now, she was in a hurry. She had another job she had been assigned to do as a medical study. And so rather than wait for the machine to figure out what drug was needed or go find the chart and see what exactly was written down, she entered an override code. And this override code allowed her to get whatever drug it was she needed. So it didn't have to be on the chart. She could type in the name of the drug and it would come out. So she wants Versed, Versed. But she only gets through VE before a drug pops up. Without reading what it was, she hits the button to dispense the drug, and out it comes. Now, on top of it was a warning label, but Vaught didn't see that warning, nor did she read the label after she picked up the drug. She noticed it was a powder, which was unusual. Versed is a liquid. Vaught looked for somewhere on the bottle with instructions to reconstitute the powder into a liquid form. She did find those instructions, but she didn't notice the name of the drug that was written above it, nor did she notice the number of warnings about the drug. She didn't read those because she wasn't looking for warnings.
Vaught did not have Versed. She had Vecuronium, but she didn't realize that, not even as she was administering this drug to Murphy. Versed was meant to calm Murphy, as we said, for her PET scan. But Vecuronium was a powerful paralytic and was not at all what Murphy should have received. After giving Murphy the drug, Vaught left. By that evening, Murphy, who was supposed to be released soon, was instead brain dead. She died the very next day. Vaught told police afterwards, "I probably just killed a patient." After an investigation, the Tennessee Medical Board stripped Vaught of her license. But that wasn't the end. The state of Tennessee charged her with reckless homicide, criminally negligent homicide, and gross neglect. After a jury trial, Vaught was convicted of those final two charges. Nurses around the country were outraged. Was Vaught a murderer, or was she a victim of a flawed system that overworked her and demanded far too much of her and other nurses?
And like I said, if you're in the nursing profession, you have heard about this case. I have no doubt about it. And a lot of you have asked us questions about the legal procedures and what exactly this meant. So we watched a good bit of the trial. A lot of it is available on YouTube. We're going to walk through the entire case, but let me just say this as I start off. If you're interested in the tenor of the arguments and how the arguments were made and sort of the big picture, one thing you can always do, rather than sitting through all the witnesses and everything else, listen to the closing arguments. Closing arguments are really important because it is the job of the prosecution in closing argument to sort of lay out the evidence that's been presented, tie it all together, and explain how the evidence proves the elements of the charges against the person. So in a case like this, that is particularly valuable. And then you have the defense who comes up and makes their argument for why the prosecution has not made their case or why there's reasonable doubt. And you'll often have a really good idea of the defense's strategy. Remember, for the most part, the defense, all they're doing is asking questions of prosecution witnesses. And so you can get an idea of their argument, but it's really not until the end when they tie it all together that you know for sure. And then the prosecution, who always speaks last because it is their burden, they have a rebuttal where they can address the arguments made by the defense. We will put those three things on the website so you can watch them. From those, you can get to a lot of the witness testimony as well. So I recommend all of you who are really curious about this, check those arguments out because I think they'll help.
Brett, I think you and I both know a thing or two about debt. Both of us went to law school, came out with a lot of debt, and really a personal loan could be your solution if you have any sort of debt. Loans usually come with fixed monthly payments and making them a simple way to pay off your credit cards. Plus, loans usually have lower interest rates than credit cards do, and Credit Karma can help you find the best option for you. Credit Karma uses your credit card data to find loan offers that are personalized to you, so you can have a better idea of what loan amount you can get approved for.
You're so right, Alice. I graduated from law school 15 years ago and still dealing with those loans and the stress of it always hanging over you. If you want to get rid of that, Credit Karma can help. They can show you your chances of approval so you can choose between loan offers that you're more likely to get approved for and apply with more confidence. And the best part, comparing loan offers on Credit Karma is 100% free, won't affect your credit scores, and can save you money. If you're ready to apply, head to creditkarma.com/loan offers to see personalized offers. That's creditkarma/loan offers to find the loan for you. You won't regret it. creditkarma.com/loan offers. Alice, I'm really excited to talk about one of the more unique sponsors we have on the show, The Jordan Harbinger Show. We have talked about this. It is a podcast you should definitely check out since you're a fan of high-quality, fascinating podcasts hosted by interesting people. This is a show that covers a wide range of topics through weekly interviews with heavy-hitting guests. And there are a ton of episodes you'll find interesting since you're a fan of this show. If you love true crime, check out the episode with Sammy the Bull Gravano and see how the mob really works. Or listen to Amanda Knox tell her harrowing story of false accusation.
There's an episode for everyone, no matter what you're into. The show covers stories like how a professional art forger somehow made millions of dollars while being chased by the feds and the mafia. Jordan's also done an episode all about birth control and how it can alter the partners we pick and how going on or off of the pill can change elements of our personalities. This podcast covers a lot, but one constant is Jordan's ability to pull useful pieces of advice from his guests. We really enjoy this show, and we think you will as well. Search for The Jordan Harbinger Show. That's HARB as in boy, IN as in Nancy, GER on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. The Prosecutors podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Let's face it, sometimes multitasking can be overwhelming. Like when your favorite podcast is playing and the person next to you is talking and your car fan is blasting, all while you're trying to find the perfect parking spot. But then again, sometimes multitasking is easy, like quoting with Progressive Insurance. They do the hard work of comparing rates so you can find a great rate that works for you, even if it's not with them. Give their nifty comparison tool a try, and you might just find getting the rate and coverage you deserve is easy.
All you need to do is visit Progressive's website to get a quote with all the coverages you want, like comprehensive and collision coverage or personal injury protection. Then you'll see Progressive's direct rate, and their tool will provide options from other companies all lined up and ready to compare, so it's simple to choose the rate and coverages you like. Press play on comparing auto rates. Quote at Progressive.com to join the over 27 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy. Alice, when I buy meat, I want it to be the highest quality available. It tastes better, you know it's more ethically raised, and it's sustainable. And that's where ButcherBox comes in. Meal prepping may be difficult, but ButcherBox makes it easy. ButcherBox is a subscription service that takes the guesswork out of finding high-quality meat. ButcherBox sources their meat from partners with the highest standards of quality. And I gotta tell you, I've got a butcher just down the road from me, and the steaks that I had from ButcherBox were just as good, if not better, and there was enough to feed my whole family.
Brett, I know. My boys absolutely love steak and really any type of meat. And recently we got a We had a pot roast made from Butcher Box meat, and they ate it all up. I had no leftovers, even though it was such a large portion. I loved the convenience of it getting delivered to my door, it being so affordable, and the quality being so high. Now, every month, Butcher Box ships and curates a selection of high-quality meats right to your home and free shipping for the continental U.S. That's no antibiotics or added hormones in the meats, and each box contains between 8 to 14 pounds of meat, depending on the box you choose. That's enough for 24 individual meals. So this is your chance to never have to shop for ground beef again. That's right. Butcher Box is giving new members free ground beef for life. So sign up at butcherbox.com/prosecute and get 2 pounds of ground beef free in every order for the life of your membership. Log on to butcherbox.com/prosecute to claim this deal.
The way we want to start our discussion about this, though, is to talk about the charges. I think if we talk about the charges first and then get into some of the facts, it'll help frame our discussion and maybe give some clarity to people about what happened. Let's start with reckless homicide. This was the first charge that Vaught was charged with, and it was the one that she was acquitted of. So she is actually acquitted of this charge. Let me read you what reckless homicide is in Tennessee. The reckless killing of another. Reckless means that a person acts recklessly with respect to circumstances surrounding the conduct or the result of the conduct when the person is aware of but consciously disregards a substantial and unjustifiable risk that the circumstances exist or the result will occur. Now that may sound like legal gobbledygook, so let's just nail it down. Basically, it's when you act in a way where you disregard an obvious danger to another person. You know, sometimes this will be described as you're just callous, or you total disregard for human life. You do something that you just don't even care. You're not trying to hurt someone, but you don't care if someone gets hurt. We've talked about sort of firing a gun into a crowd. You're not trying to kill any particular person. Maybe you're not even trying to kill anybody, but you're doing something that is very dangerous, and you're doing it without any regard to the fact that someone may be harmed. I'm going to get into this a little bit more, but I note for you, the jury acquitted RaDonda of this charge. And I think what the heart of this case is a simple question. If you kill someone and everyone agrees it was the result of a mistake, should you nevertheless be charged and convicted of that crime? I think the prosecution overcharged here. I think this reckless homicide charge was a reach. I don't think anybody really thinks that RaDonda Vaught intended for this to happen or even disregarded obvious danger in the way we were just discussing when this happened. What happened here is she made a mistake. And the question is she criminally liable for that mistake? And to me, the second charge, criminally negligent homicide, is really where the action's going to be as we walk through this case. So let me read that to you. Criminally negligent conduct is when a person ignores a known or obvious risk or disregards the life and safety of others. The harm itself is unintentional, but nevertheless is a result of conscious decisions of the person. So a common example of this is drunk driving. So you drink, you're not intending to hurt anyone, but despite the fact that you've had a lot to drink and you intentionally did that, and you know you did that, and you know you shouldn't be driving, you get in a car anyway, an accident occurs, and someone dies. Obviously, the drunk driver is not attempting to kill anyone, but he made the decision that resulted in death. So that's an example that often comes up. We're going to talk about whether that circumstance really fits with this case. But for now, keep that in the back of your mind. The third charge and the last charge, gross neglect. The person knowingly, other than by accidental means, grossly neglected an impaired adult if the abuse or neglect results in serious mental or physical harm. Neglect means the deprivation of services by a caretaker that were necessary to maintain the health or welfare of the adult.
Yeah, what you've said, Brett, is very important. We've just read to you the statute that exists in Tennessee. Those are the elements that must be met in order to find someone guilty of that charge. Now, I know there's been a lot of emotion in this case and a lot written about the case in the media. But keep in mind, don't conflate the two very important questions here. One question is, are the elements met? Recognizing that these statutes exist. And a second question that I think in the media and kind of the response to this particular case has conflated is the kind of broader, more philosophical question, should these statutes, should these laws exist at all? And that gets to the heart of what Brett was saying is when someone dies and it was an accident, there was no intention to cause that death, should we be holding someone criminally liable? That is a broader policy question that is a very important question to have, but a very different question from whether there is sufficiency of the evidence at trial to meet the elements of these laws.
And we're about to get into the details of the case, but I do think it's important that as you're listening to these, you have this sort of baseline understanding of the law, and you think about what exactly we're trying to show here. I mentioned earlier drunk driving, and that doesn't really feel like it applies here, does it? Because there's no, at least to me, corollary between the decision to drink and the decision to get in the car and what happened with RaDonda Vaught. RaDonda Vaught, to me at least, never made a decision that was necessarily as culpable as drinking and getting into a car. Now, she made decisions, and she did things, and she didn't do things that resulted in this person's death, but nothing like that. So I want to give you two examples that recently occurred that are examples of this that were in the news that you may have heard of. One of them involved a truck driver who they were driving down some really steep roadways. And if you guys have ever driven out west in the United States, you've seen these signs that warn truck drivers, check your brakes, that point out that there are these off-ramps that trucks can go down if they lose control, all of these things to prevent accidents from happening. This truck driver was driving a load on one of these roads. His brakes went out, he lost control, he crossed the middle line, he struck a bunch of cars, and a number of people died. I mean, we're talking 7, 8, 9 people. He was charged with involuntary manslaughter, which is a very similar charge to this. He actually ended up getting a lot of time because there was a mandatory minimum on each charge, and there was a lot of outcry about that because he got essentially a life sentence for an accident. Now, why was he charged? He was charged because earlier he had stopped his vehicle at a rest stop, and his brakes were red hot. They were glowing red, which is a sign that he's having used them a lot and that they're on the verge of failure. This is a big warning sign that he should be concerned about. Then, as he's driving and he's starting to lose control, rather than take one of these exits, one of these off-ramps that basically go up the mountain so the truck slows down, he tried to maintain control. He lost control. He wrecked the truck. People died. Pure accident. He didn't intend for it to happen, but there were warnings that he ignored or missed, and death resulted, and he was convicted. Another case, which you've surely heard of. An officer is involved in an altercation. I believe it's a traffic stop. At some point, she intends to pull her taser and tase the person. But instead, she pulls her firearm and shoots the person, and they die. There's no question it was an accident. There's no question that she intended to do that. No one thinks that. No rational person thinks that she intended to do that. Nevertheless, she was convicted of a similar charge because the idea was just, look, you're a police officer. You have to have greater care than what you're showing here. And by the fact that you did what you did, we're going to hold you responsible for the death that resulted. The other thing I want you to remember is that care. Does it matter that this is a nurse? Is there some sort of higher duty on nurses, a duty of care vis-a-vis their patients that maybe an ordinary person wouldn't have? Didn't come up so much in the trial. Wasn't really a part of it, but I think it's something to think about. Those of you, there's no duty, for instance, for a normal person. Somebody's out, they're drowning, right? They're drowning in the ocean. You do not have a responsibility to save them. If you don't save them, you can't be charged with anything. Lifeguards, on the other hand, do have a duty to save them. And if a lifeguard sees someone drowning and they don't attempt to save them, they actually can be charged because of this duty. They can be charged with some sort of crime. It's a similar thing. And these are just all things to keep in your mind as we walk through the facts of this case.
Now, let's dive into some of those facts because they are key here. And this is why this case went to trial, because remember, the judge is the judge of the law, but the jury is the judge of the facts. And so this case, because this case went to trial, the jury heard the facts of the case. And here is one of the first things that jumps out at me when you heard the story at the beginning, the override function that she keyed in. One of the issues at trial was, of course, the use of the override function on the automatic medicine dispenser. As you heard, when the drug was first typed in, because the generic name of the drug had been put into Murphy's file, when Vaught put in Versed, the automatic medicine dispenser would not pull up any drug, and therefore she was not able to access any drug. Kind of trying to get this particular task done, she went ahead and did the override code as opposed to try and figure out what drugs were on Murphy's chart and whether there was a generic name on there. Now, for quite some time, the automatic dispenser had not been working as expected. The machine would take forever to dispense medication or wouldn't do so at all, and nurses were instructed just to override the system and manually enter the request for the drug. However, there was testimony by the administrator that those problems had been fixed by the time of Murphy's death. In fact, at that time, only 3% of medication requests included an override. So even if the previous practice had been that the machine was broken, nurses go ahead and use the override code, by the time Murphy's situation came about, only 3%, a very, very small percentage of the medication requests needed an override code. Still, if Vaught tried to get the drug and something was wrong, she may have believed that this was a reoccurrence of prior problems. And it's easy to see how the issues the hospital had suffered before could have led to the override situation occurring, especially if at these times, this is the day after Christmas, this isn't even her patient, you're trying to get through all your tasks, so this is an additional task on top of all the patients she had to care for. You can imagine that muscle memory may take over if for the past however many months you'd been using an override code, and more recently you no longer needed to, but when you see that there is no drug coming up, your muscle memory may kick in to do that override code.
And this is sort of one example of something we talked about with the Good Nurse, Bad Nurse podcast. And that's, to what extent is the system responsible for what happened? And this, by the system, I just mean sort of the way Vanderbilt was running everything, nursing in general, and how just as part of the system, you almost become accustomed to doing things that seem problematic. So the automatic drug dispensing machine exists for a reason. I mean, there's a reason it exists. It's a protection. It's one of those things that's a protection. This way you make sure you're getting the drug you want, not just some random drug, but the drug you need that's been assigned to your patient. But here, they've been having all these problems, and it's not working, and they get email after email that's like, just override it, just override it. And you have this testimony where the administrator's like, well, yeah, but by that time, we were down to 3%. Well, yeah, but you've been hammering in people's heads, just override it. If you have a problem, just override it. So even if you know that the baseline problem has been fixed, she doesn't necessarily know that. And she's just doing what she always does. And not only what she always does, but what she's been conditioned to do by the hospital and by the system that she's working under.
We know that Vaught actually got a drug to come out of the medicine dispenser, and it was the paralytic drug Vecuronium. Now, because Vaught injected a paralyzer into Murphy and not a sedative, Murphy was not sedated as her body began to shut down. In fact, she would have been fully conscious until her depressed lung function eventually rendered her into a coma. In other words, this would have been incredibly painful. Because she was paralyzed, she would have been unable to say anything or give any signal to anyone about the problems she was suffering. She could hear and see, but she could not speak. I mean, this is really a devastating and horrible way for Murphy to go.
And I think it's something that's important to remember because it is easy here, as we're going to talk about. RaDonda Vaught is a very sympathetic defendant for a lot of different reasons, not least of which that she has completely owned up to what she did. We're going to talk about that in a second, just how much she's owned up to what she did. And it's easy to worry about her, and it's easy to worry about sort of the meta problem here and the consequences of this prosecution. But I think it's also important to remember Murphy. Murphy is the victim here, and she suffered. And I think everyone agrees that she suffered and that this was a really horrible way to go. And I think RaDonda Vaught would tell you that. And I think she would tell you that she's haunted by this, haunted by what happened. And I think it's important to remember that it's not just about the defendant. There is also a victim. And there is someone who paid for their life because of these mistakes that happened. Now, in a case like this, you're going to have experts because I don't know anything about nursing. I don't want to speak for Alice. She probably was a nurse at one point.
I don't know anything about nursing, except for...
Alice doesn't know anything about nursing either.
Except for the nurses that have cared for me throughout my life, who are wonderful.
And just to reiterate, and yes, and they are amazing. I mean, when my son was in the hospital, when he was in the NICU, just angels, right? I mean, just amazing people. I have nothing but respect for nurses, but I have no idea what you guys do. I don't understand what you do or how you do it or what you're doing, why you're doing all the things you're doing. It's a complete mystery to me. It's going to be a complete mystery to the average juror. I mean, this is one of the interesting things about the jury system. We love the jury system. It's the greatest thing in the world. But what you're doing is you're putting 12 people who don't know anything about anything on a jury where they're having to make decisions based on highly technical things. And so in a case like that, that's where experts can be really valuable. And as I've said on the Good Nurse, Bad Nurse podcast, just talking to her, Alice and I were learning things. I hope you guys will listen to that episode because I think it's a really great episode and a good companion to what we're doing here. And she was telling us some things and describing things and explaining things. And we'll talk about some of those as we walk through what the prosecution said, and maybe some of it doesn't hold up as much as it should. But you had these experts in this case. And there was a big question, one that the defense really focused on. And we've talked about this before. The defense has to make a decision. They have to decide, how are we going to defend this case? What are we going to say? What is our angle going to be? What is the story that we're going to tell? And I think the defense walked into this case and thought, at least on negligent homicide, we got a lot of problems because somebody died, and it's pretty easy to tie that death directly to the actions and the inactions of our client. So if we just try and fight on that battleground, we're probably going to lose. So they went for something else. They tried to raise some reasonable doubt about whether or not this action, whatever you think of it, no matter how negligent it might be, actually killed Murphy. Or if perhaps her death actually was a result of her injury and would have occurred anyway. And remember, they don't have to prove that. They don't have to prove that her death would have resulted from the brain bleed in any event. All they have to do is leave the jury with some reasonable doubt about whether or not this mistake is actually what caused the death. So the prosecution, they anticipate this. They know this is what's going to happen.
And Brett, before you move into what the expert says, that is a very common and can be effective tactic for the defense attorney. I think the classic example you can have is that two people were shooting guns in a room, right? There's a shootout or something. There's two people shooting and a bullet hits someone and it kills them. And the defense would argue that you don't know which bullet it is that killed them. So do you have beyond a reasonable doubt to know that it was the bullet that came from their client's gun that killed the defendant? Now, legally, that's actually, we can talk about that later, but you can see how you start spinning and making people think, oh, well, even if this drug could have killed them, maybe something else killed them in advance of Vaught's mistake. And that may seem like a technicality, but it's something we actually see as a pretty common defense strategy.
Yeah, I mean, being able to walk into court and say to a jury in closing argument, everything the prosecution said is right. They got it all right. Everything they said is true. Guess what? It's not enough. Because they didn't prove X. Right? That way, you're not fighting the prosecution. You're not fighting the witnesses. You're not fighting their evidence. You're saying, yeah, all that's right. You don't have to worry about that. But what you have to decide is, did they prove this thing? And they didn't prove that thing, and therefore, our guy's acquitted. Right? I mean, that's a pretty powerful defense, and it's a really effective way to undermine what the prosecution is trying to do. And I'll give you an example of this. I mean, a lot of you guys are pretty familiar with the Casey Anthony case. And you have the prosecution who comes in and they have all this proof about, well, this was Casey Anthony. She knew that her daughter was killed and she knew her body was deposited here. And the defense gets up in opening arguments like, yep, she sure did. She died. This is how she died. This is when she died. This is what happened to her. And it sort of undermines everything the prosecution's trying to do because they're like, oh, wait, so you're not contesting any of that? And it shifts the battleground. And it shifts the battleground away from what the prosecution wants to focus on to what the defense wants to focus on. The prosecution wants to focus on the fact she got the wrong drug. She got the wrong drug and she gave the wrong drug to her patient. That's what you need to focus on. And the defense is like, yeah, she did. She shouldn't have done that. That was bad. But guess what? It didn't kill her. And since it didn't kill her, she's not guilty. So the prosecution, they sort of anticipate this. They call Chief Medical Examiner Fang Li, who testifies that Murphy died from the effects of this vecuronium. However, on cross-examination, he has to admit that because of the nature of the drug and how it interacts with the body, he can't actually measure the amount of the drug that's in Murphy's body. And this was a problem because a small dose of the drug would not have killed her. And so the defense, they call another medical expert, Dr. Eli Zimmerman. Now, he is a Vanderbilt neurologist. And he testifies that it was possible that Murphy did not die because of the vecuronium, or at least entirely because of it. He testifies that the brain injury that led her to being in the hospital was serious, and it was the kind of injury that could have caused her death. Now, it's been reported that Murphy was about to be released from the hospital. This is a little bit of indulgence by the newspaper. One thing I'll tell you guys, if you're relying on the popular press to tell you something about a legal case, they almost always get it wrong. Yes, Murphy could have been released, but there was a reason that they had ordered a PET scan in the first place because they weren't sure. They were concerned about this injury. They thought it could be more serious, and they wanted to make sure that it wasn't serious before they released her. And that was the whole purpose of this injection. Now, there's a problem with the defense. And I think all of you kind of get this. It would take some serious suspension of disbelief to think that Murphy just so happened to die immediately after an injection of a potentially deadly medication, but nevertheless, the drug had nothing to do with it. And then you have the words of RaDonda Vaught herself, who told the medical board, I know the reason this patient is no longer here is because of me. There won't ever be a day that goes by that I don't think about what I did. And I feel like this argument about how she died might be a pretty good example of the difference between any doubt and reasonable doubt. And we've brought this up before. What is the difference between having some doubt about someone's guilt and having reasonable doubt about their guilt? You might have some residual doubt about, well, it's possible she just died of the brain bleed and it had nothing to do with a drug. I don't know that that's reasonable doubt. I don't know that it's reasonable to believe that she just so happened to die right after she was given a drug, but the drug didn't have anything to do with it. And I think that's sort of the problem the defense has here. Even to the extent they raise some doubt, I don't think it's a reasonable doubt.
Yeah, and really what is so, heart-stopping is what you said last there, Brett, Vaught's own words. Now, in one sense, isn't this what we teach our children? Immediately confess and tell the whole truth of what you did. And those words 100% acknowledge her mistakes and accepts responsibility. But as we know now, the prosecution used many of Vaught's own words against her. In addition to what she said to the medical board, she also told law enforcement that she, quote, probably just killed a patient. And this was soon after she had injected Murphy with the vecuronium. In fact, much of her statements to the medical board were used against her. For instance, she told the medical board that she was, quote, complacent and, quote, distracted. She admitted that she did not double check the medication, even though she had multiple opportunities to do so. And she said the death was, quote, completely my fault. Now, the fact that so much of what she told the medical board was used against her has raised concerns among the medical community, understandably. This is because the medical field is run by people, and people are not perfect. Mistakes happen. Mistakes happen at hospitals, and they happen in the medical field somewhat regularly. In fact, according to a 2016 study done by Johns Hopkins University, medical errors are the third leading cause of death in the United States, with more than 250,000 people dying every year as a result of medical errors. That's 10% of all deaths every year. So to give you some idea of how many people that is, the second leading cause of death, cancer, kills 500,000 people. The fourth is respiratory disease, and that kills 150,000 people a year. The number of non-fatal injuries caused by medical errors is exponentially higher. The fact that medical errors is the third leading cause of death in the United States might make you think that we need to be punishing even more nurses and doctors for mistakes. But that is not the conclusion the Johns Hopkins report reaches. Rather, they conclude, quote, most errors represent systemic problems, including poorly coordinated care, fragmented insurance networks, the absence or underuse of safety nets, and other protocols, in addition to unwarranted variation in physician practice patterns that lack accountability. To deal with these problems, we need nurses and doctors who are open and honest about what happened and why it happened. The difficulty here is Vaught did just that, and her statements were used against her. And so, of course, there is the unintended consequence and the fear that this case may actually lead to more deaths in the years to come because people are unwilling to accept responsibility to alert someone right away if the recognition of their mistake may be able to be turned around to save a patient. And furthermore, it's going to make the medical board's job harder because they will have people not wanting to speak to them, not wanting to be candid, not wanting to be straightforward, and it would be more difficult to know what actual practice is like and to identify the systemic problems that the Johns Hopkins study found. And, I've seen and read a lot of medical board investigation reports or interviews with people who have been brought in for questioning for mistakes or intentional misconduct that they have done. And the medical board is not a law enforcement body, right? They're a regulatory body for a profession. You pay to be part of a board. We pay to be part of a bar, a legal bar, in order to practice. They govern how we're able to practice. They certify us. They give us certifications so that people know that we are trustworthy. based on this regulatory body. And that's what the medical board is. So you can imagine that a nurse talking to the medical board is simply speaking to their association that they know they are governed by, but they're not talking to the police. Now, in Vaught's case, she was just as candid with the medical board as she was with the police. So there wasn't any gaming of the system on her part. But there does seem to be a bit of a switch and bait because the medical board is trying to make sure that they are keeping the profession regulated in a way that keeps out bad actors or anyone who could hurt people who are being treated, right? And so you would think that speaking with them, we're all on the same page. We're trying to get to the same result, which is make sure the patients are getting good care. But law enforcement are looking at Vaught's statements as admissions of guilt. And that's exactly what the prosecution uses her words for, admissions of guilt. In the court of law, usually hearsay is not allowed, right? We've had lots of conversations about hearsay. Hearsay is where a statement made outside court is offered for the truth of the matter asserted. And in this case, the prosecution is able to use Vaught's own words in court, not because she is saying them in court, but because of an exception to the hearsay rule, which is statement of a party opponent, meaning because she is a defendant and it's her own words, it gets to be brought in as evidence.
Yeah, the whole bit about how anything you say can and will be used against you is 100% true. And in many ways, I feel like this is the heart of this case. We're going to continue and talk more about what RaDonda did, and we're going to walk through for you everything that she messed up and all the different places that she could have prevented this. I'll just go ahead and lay my cards on the table. As far as looking at the statute, looking at this criminally negligent homicide statute, applying what happened, applying the law to her, I don't think there's any question she's guilty. I just don't think there's any question. Just as a matter of law, when you look at what she did and you look at what happened, I think she's pretty clearly guilty. One thing to remember, though, that doesn't mean she should have been prosecuted. And it certainly doesn't mean that the prosecution should have used the evidence they used. Now, this is really hard because as a prosecutor, this evidence lands on your plate. I mean, you have someone saying, this person is dead because of me. I am the reason this person died. No one besides me bears any responsibility. I was complacent. I was distracted. Completely my fault. I know the reason this patient is no longer here is because of me. It's hard not to use that. It's hard not to just think, man, this is an easy conviction. Let's go with this, right? But then you think about, why is she saying this? In what circumstances is she saying this? She's saying this because she wants to prevent it from happening again. She wants to give the boards the information they need to know what went wrong and why did it go wrong. And I got to tell you, if I was a nurse or a doctor and something like this happened on my watch, I would be like, you can talk to my lawyer. I'm not saying anything about this. Because now that all of those things can be used against you and will be used against you in a court of law, my interest in preventing this from happening again is high. My interest in not going to jail is higher. And I think that sets up some really terrible incentives and makes the situation much more dangerous. Remember, why do we prosecute these cases? You know, we prosecute cases for a bunch of different reasons. I mean, one of them is to punish people. You know, one of them is you have some bad people. We forget this sometimes, and this kind of bothers me. People act like the only reason we put people in jail is for rehabilitation. No, that is not right. We put people in jail to punish them. If you do something horrible to someone, you need to go to jail because you need to be punished. And if you're rehabilitated, that's icing on the cake. I'm not really worried about you. I'm worried about giving justice to the victim, right? That is a very different kind of crime than what we have here. That is a crime where the person intentionally does something and they do it with a mens rea of, I'm going to hurt somebody, right? I mean, think of a murderer, think of a rapist, think of somebody who beats someone, anything like that. This is very different. We do not punish these crimes because the person is guilty in a way that must be punished. This is really about deterrence, which is another one of the reasons we punish people. This negligent homicide stuff, we really want to stop people from doing these things. All of us speed. all of us text while we're driving. All of us do these things that are inherently dangerous, and it's just by the grace of God that we haven't been in an accident that resulted in someone's death. But if we had been, we would be punished. And the reason we're punished is we're trying to prevent everyone else from doing that. We're trying to say, put down the phone, don't speed, be a responsible driver. Yes, this was an accident. That person shouldn't have been doing that. They obviously didn't intend to hurt anybody, but we have to stop this from happening. So it's all about preventing future harm. The problem here is by prosecuting this woman in the way she was prosecuted, we're actually almost ensuring future harm will happen because we're not going to have the feedback that we need. And I think that is, it's an issue that's almost bigger than the law. It's hard to expect a local prosecutor to take all that into account when they have a dead person on their hands and they have these kind of statements. But I almost feel like you have to, because the danger from pursuing this prosecution is awfully great.
Well, we're getting to the philosophical arguments already before we even get to the the results of the trial. But you're so right, Brett. That I've already used the term unintended consequences, but in a case like this, you as the prosecutor really have to step back from your studying of the notes and the drugs and the interaction of the drugs and step back for a second and see what is the effect on society, because you've got to know bringing a case like this is going to just shake the earth beneath your feet. And it, in fact, did. I'm not sure that they quite realized what type of a response it would get, because, this happened. Murphy died before the pandemic. And this case went to trial in the midst of the pandemic when there was everyone knew that the pandemic was putting immense strains on the hospital system, right? We knew that we were told, stay at home so you can flatten the curve so as not to overwhelm the hospital system, the medical staff, the medical devices. And there was words, every day in the news at this time about nurses and doctors having to come to work sick back when we didn't know really the effect of what COVID did to the body. They were these martyrs going into an unknown situation, trying to wear the best PPE, best protection that they could possibly have, but not knowing if it would be enough to protect them from a virus that was still largely unknown, but seemingly very dangerous and very transmissible. And there was a huge outpouring, rightfully so, for the medical community for taking care of us while everyone was holding away, trying to stay away from the virus. They were, charging straight into the fire, so to speak, each and every day to take care of us. And there had been, I don't think that you can't plan when your cases go to trial, so to speak, when you go to indict them, but it was the perfect storm to have the conversation that Brett has just started with the charging of Vaught and her going to trial in the midst of a pandemic where our medical community has come under immense stress and also immense support from people who have seen how stretched they are during this time, and also a devastating time when people are fleeing from the medical profession because of not only issues with danger, with strained resources, with a tense environment, being overworked, but also with the way insurance is working. I don't know enough about insurance, but I understand that it has changed the way that hospitals and providers are reimbursed, and that has driven a lot of people away from even wanting to take on the debt to go to school to become nurses and doctors and other practitioners, because they are unsure whether they can ultimately pay off their debts. All of this is coming together during Vaught's trial, and it brings up such interesting and important discussions that we as a country and a society have to face. We're just getting started, Brett, but we should probably let these people go for now.
Yeah, Alice, we've barely even scratched the surface, I feel like, of what RaDonda Vaught did herself. But I think these questions about what it means to be negligent and what it means to be responsible for someone's death, and these sort of big picture questions about what the responsibility is for the entire system and what the consequences are when you prosecute someone. I think these are really important questions, and a lot of you guys have reached out to us and you're passionate about this case, and these are the things that you're considering. It's not just about RaDonda Vaught and what she did, but it's about these bigger questions. We're going to go ahead and stop for now. When we come back next week, we will be talking a lot more about this case in particular and what RaDonda Vaught did and did not do that led to this death. And I think we can look at this case both ways. We can look at this case the way we look at all cases. It's just a criminal case with someone who's been accused of a crime, and there are elements to the crime to meet, and there's evidence about whether or not those elements are met, and there was a trial, and there was a jury decision, and all those things. We can think about it that way, but we can also think about these big questions. I know there's going to be a lot of discussion and talk about this on the gallery and in other places. I look forward to that. I'm sure it will be respectful, as it always is. You guys are so good at handling these complex questions. As always, you guys can find us at Prosecutors Pod on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all the social medias. Shoot us an email, prosecutorspod@gmail.com. Check out our website, prosecutorspodcast.com, where we have a lot of different documents and links where you can watch some of the things we talked about, including some of the video from the trial itself, if you're interested in looking into that. We will be at CrimeCon in a couple weeks. We hope you guys will see us there. Come and see us on Podcast Row. We're not talking on any of the panels or anything like that. We're not cool enough to do that. But we will be hanging out so much better. You don't want to hear us talk. You want to come meet us and hang out and have a beer and play some craps. And that's what we're going to be doing. So we're looking forward to seeing you there. And I know Alice can't wait to see all you guys again.
It's so true, Brett. It was so great to see everyone last year. A bunch of people who stopped by and, wanted to wish you well by video. They now get to do it in person. So you guys, Brett's going to be there. So will I. Come and say hi. Our favorite part about CrimeCon is just getting to know you guys as people. Go out to drinks, go out to eat, just hang out with you guys.
Yeah, we absolutely cannot wait. Well, Alice, do you have anything else about RaDonda Vaught's case you want to add before we sign off for this time?
What an interesting case. We are so glad you guys brought it to our attention. We really only read the headlines, but so many of you during our Get Vocal requested this case specifically and wrote in with your experiences and expertises. And it was because of your interest that we decided to cover this. So we do listen, and we appreciate you guys showing your interest in this case. Let us know how we're doing.
We absolutely do listen. We love your request. We love doing cases that you want to hear covered. So if you ever have requests, please send them to us on email. Let us know on any of the various ways you guys get in touch with us. Well, we will be back to talk more about this case next week. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. See that
no, more
that review that said you giggle too much?
Oh, so nice. Also, how misogynistic.
I don't know. I don't know.
I'm gonna giggle all I want.
The Lady Vanishes gave us a nice shout out.
Did they? I did not.
It's funny because they probably have like 10 times as many listeners as we do. But here's
awesome.
What they said. Wow. Every now and then you wake up and see something really surprising. Top U.S. true crime podcast, The Prosecutors, has reviewed the Lady Vanishes podcast and praised our investigation. Thanks, Brett and Alice, for listening and being so supportive of our podcast.
Oh, that's awesome. top U.S. true crime. Top.
I don't know.
If she
yeah.
thinks we're top, then we're top.
Then we're clearly top. Question about it. Anyway. Okay, sorry. I'm gonna get to this. Okay.